Welcome to the EMEA Recruitment Podcast, brought to you in partnership with Operation Smile. We're hoping to raise money and awareness for the work Operation Smile does around the world to deliver life-changing surgery to children born with cleft lip and palate. Please donate at emearecruitment.eu/operation-smile. In this episode, we're joined by Jose Bianconi, the Managing Director for Coty Beauty, Southeast Asia and India. He reveals the lessons he's learned about himself over the past 18 months, resilience, and to focus on the things we can control.
So hello, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of the EMEA Recruitment Podcast in partnership with our good friends over at Operation Smile. As my colleague Rose mentioned, we're delighted to welcome Jose onto the podcast today. So hopefully you can hear me okay, Jose, and everything is well with you?
Everything is good. Thank you for having me, Paul.
No problem at all. It's a pleasure to welcome you as a guest on the podcast, and I'm hoping it's going to be an interesting discussion that both you'll enjoy, but also our listeners will enjoy as well.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Perfect. So, I mean, we've got a range of questions to go through. Now, some of these questions have come from our internal network, some from the external network that we have. So I know there will be a good list of questions and hopefully answers that will inspire the network through the next 45 minutes or so. And I guess, the first one really is, I suppose it's a fairly obvious one to ask most people in the current time that we're living in. It's obviously been a very challenging period with the COVID situation. So how have you dealt with the whole COVID situation from a personal and business point of view? Because clearly it's been very challenging, especially when you're trying to manage and develop teams and people. But we've found that a lot of people have prioritized and had more focus in their day, both at home and at work. So what is there anything you particularly learned from the COVID situation?
I would say first, as you say, it's been extremely challenging, right? And even in our case, where we have been in a place like Singapore that managed the situation extremely well, there are always some things of our normal daily and professional lives that we missed during the last year and a half, right? So in terms of my learnings about it, the first one is about the resilience. I think I still remember back in April of last year, you started worrying about what was going to happen, right? Like the world seemed to be falling. And throughout these 16, 18 months, I have seen that our ability to find ways to adapt, both on the personal and professional sides, it's, I would say, infinite, right? So we found new ways of doing business, new ways of collaborating. We found new ways of entertaining ourselves, new ways of educating our kids. So I think that resilience and that ability to adapt to whatever life throws at us, it's my biggest learning. The second is something that, let's say, I knew, but this situation reinforced in me, is you need to focus on what you can control, right? There are many, many things that worry us about this situation, but in the end, only 3 or 4 things are within our control, and those are the things that will, in the end, help you through, right? Of course, you need to stay healthy, you need to stay disciplined, whereas in work, right, you cannot control if people will go to stores, you cannot control government restrictions, but you can control what you execute, what the quality of the product that you put out there, whether it's the physical product or the output of your meetings. So focusing on what we can control first clarifies your mind, brings you some level of peace, and second, provides the best outcome in my experience. So I would say those are the 2 biggest things I have learned in this year and a half.
It's really interesting, your answers to that, because, the 2 things you focused on there, the resilience and focusing on what you can control yourself. I mean, clearly they are very strong traits that successful people such as yourself have and probably had before COVID, but they've been highlighted more in these challenging times. But I mean, I think with both of them, they are things that I suppose everybody would like to be better at. You know, I mean, are there any hints or advice, especially on the focus on what you can control side of things? Because I think it's natural that people always worry about what's happening that they have no control over, whether it's in work or in life in general. I mean, do you have a way of dealing with that at all? I mean, I know a lot of people use things like meditation and having some time out for themselves to really think about, you know, where things are. Is there any way you're able to focus your own mind on what you can control?
I would say three things work to help me focus on what I can control, right? The first one is have clarity on what's important for me, right? Whether it is on my personal life or my professional life, what is it that I want to achieve, right? In the end, what's really important. For instance, the health of my kids, or in the case of businesses, the integrity of the business, the sustainability of the business. Once I am clear on that, I think it also helps me a lot to write down all the things that I could do to help that, right? Because I think it's natural to worry, right? We open the newspaper and we find bad news. We receive reports. We receive an email about a certain market going into lockdown or a certain customer folding. And so you're constantly surrounded by bad news. So it's very natural to in a way, get distracted by that and get into a worry mode, right? So for me, what helps me pull back from that is to write down, okay, in this context, all of these things are happening. What exactly can I do, right? Whether it is, okay, I can drive e-commerce and I can list these new products in an e-commerce marketplace, or I can plan this promotion, or I can review this budget to see if I can find any saving, or I can work with HR to provide some training to our team. So writing down that kind of thing, prioritizing, and then moving on into execution mode, I think that helps me a lot to divert my attention from the concern topics into the topics that I can control. And the last one is having an outlet to vent my energy or to dissipate my worry, right? Like some people do meditation. In my case, it's sports. I love being outdoor. I love running. So I try to stay disciplined to that. So every day I do it, no matter what. And that helps me, in a way, drive out the bad energy from everything that is happening and start my day in a more relaxed way.
No, again, really interesting there, you know, having a clear plan. You've got a defined, say, outlet to vent the energy with the running, which I think it's well known that if you're able to spend some time out running or doing any kind of exercise, it does help mentally as well as physically, you know. So I think you are almost providing a textbook example of what to do to keep the focus there and keep your mind calm and controlled and focused on the goals, you know. So it's very interesting to hear your approach on this, Jose. And I thought I'd sort of move the conversation slightly more towards the actual business and the industry. So it's the same type of question, but more related to the industry, because clearly you've had over 20 years experience across the beauty and cosmetic industry in general. And obviously, there can't be many more challenging times the industry has faced than what it's been going through recently. So, I mean, what do you think the sort of the short-term goals of the industry are right now?
I would say that there have been a lot of changes in the way that the consumers interact with beauty products. Some of them are driven by, for instance, the restrictions put in place, right? If you are wearing a mask all day, then you are not that inclined to buy a new lipstick. At the same time, you want to take care of yourself. So you may prefer to splurge in a good skincare product because you are also seeing your face every day in Zoom or in front of the mirror. You still may want to smell well, and you'll buy a fragrance, and because you are not spending on travel, right, or you're not going out as much, then you'll spend more on products, or you'll buy higher quality products, right? So those are a few things that all the beauty companies have seen, right? So we have seen a shift between categories. We have seen a shift towards more premium products. Of course, we have also seen a shift between channels from physical stores into e-commerce, and new ways of selling in e-commerce, like streaming or social commerce, etc. So all of these companies are dealing with that, right? How to adapt our portfolio, how to adapt our offering, how to adapt our promotional plans to these shifts, and in a way trying to understand what of these changes are going to stay and what of these changes are going to revert back, in some cases fully, in some cases partially, once we go back to some kind of new normal life, right? Because I think that's extremely important to understand what is going to be the new balance in 3, 6 months, 1 year, whenever life goes back to this new normal that everybody talks about. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges. Then the other challenge that we as an industry are facing is that the whole situation around COVID-19 has created more awareness about the impact that our consumption and our products have on the planet. So we are seeing a trend towards cleaner products, more sustainable products. So how can we accelerate the transition towards those products, right? Because we are a fast-moving consumer goods company, so a lot of what we manufacture may end up in a landfill, right? And we want to avoid that by recycling, by using recycled products, and of course with the cleaner ingredients that are seen by consumers as healthier and less damaging to the environment. I would say those are the biggest things that we have seen during the last year and a half. In some cases are trends that were happening before and were accelerated or reinforced during this situation, like clean products and e-commerce. And in some cases, we think some of these trends will revert, at least partially, like lipsticks and makeup in general. We think that those products will come back once people can go out, right? And some people are even saying that they may come back with a vengeance. Like people will try to make up for the lost time and go out more, travel more. So a lot of changes, a lot of things to try to understand, and a lot of adaptation to these changes.
Hi everybody, it's Paul Thomas here. I hope that you're well and you're enjoying the podcast so far. Thank you once again for your continued support listening to the podcast. I just wanted to break into the recording to talk to you about a really exciting new partnership that EMEA Recruitment has along with Operation Smile. And as founder of EMEA Recruitment, it's an honour and a privilege to announce this partnership. Personally, I was born with a cleft lip and palate, so the mission of Operation Smile is something that I have a strong personal connection with. It's not an understatement to say that the dentists and surgeons that helped me were life changers. It's not only about the actual operations that take place, the support and care post and pre-operation are beyond value. And from personal experience, I can only say that I'd not be the confident, happy person I am today without this support. I want to help children experience the support and care and skill that I experienced on my journey, and hope that we can do this along with Operation Smile. Every 3 minutes, a child is born with a cleft lip or cleft palate, and the mission of Operation Smile is to provide help and support to these children through providing 6,000 medical volunteers across 80 countries who are dedicated to help these children with facial conditions, most commonly cleft lip and cleft palate. More than 200,000 children are born with a cleft every year, and they are often unable to speak, eat, socialise or even smile. However, it can take as little as 45 minutes and cost just €180 or 182 francs for Operation Smile to provide a child with life-changing surgery. Now, in partnership with Operation Smile, EMEA Recruitment is raising valuable funds and aiming to create 100 new smiles to support the organisation to provide free surgeries for children and young adults all over the world. Please help us by donating through the link in the bio, or get in touch to see how your company can help get involved too. For the moment, I'll leave you to carry on listening to the rest of the podcast, but if there's anything I can do in terms of answering any questions or finding out how you can help and support EMEA Recruitment and Operation Smile, then please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you once again and enjoy the rest of the podcast.
No, it's interesting because, obviously with your background, you had a number of successful years at Procter & Gamble across the globe before moving to Coty, now in Singapore. So two companies where you have some of the largest and most successful brand names across the globe. And I think you've mentioned within your answer there that obviously innovation is a big part of staying ahead of competition and making sure you have sustainable products that people can relate to the values and the ethics of a business. Is there anything else you think that's really key to keeping ahead of competition in this market? Because it's such a fierce market and so many options for consumers these days. But your experience with P&G and Coty is obviously really valuable to get insights from. Have you found there's a way that these companies really are able to keep ahead of the competition?
Whenever a company has been successful, and I have been in companies that have been successful for periods of time, or always looking at our competitors, and when we see that they are successful, we always find that the first thing is they focus on the consumer, right? They try to understand what the consumer want, either because they say it or because you really understand them and you can anticipate their needs. So the innovation is driven by consumer needs, not by just having a technology available or just because we can do it, right? So it's consumer-driven innovation. Then having the ability to communicate clearly what your product can do for the consumer, right? Even when it's not necessarily a functional benefit, like in the case of beauty, but it's more about how our products make the consumer feel about themselves, right? Like giving them a little bit of confidence to face the day. And then lastly is working collaboratively with our distribution and supply chain partners, right? Because no company can do everything by itself. So we need to work very collaboratively with retailers, understand their needs, understand their strategies, find ways to align what we have with them. And likewise with suppliers, because if you become a preferred partner for your suppliers, then they will give you always the best innovation, they will give you the best cost. So those three things, they may sound a little bit generic, but in the end, it's about that, and it's simple and complex, right? So it's simple to understand, it's complex to do, because it requires a lot of discipline to constantly be looking out for what the consumer want and what are the trends, what are they saying and not saying, constantly communicating with your customers and try to find ways to, in some cases, compromise to deliver on their needs, and the same with suppliers.
No, it's interesting because you mentioned there a lot of this is around the relationship building with your suppliers, with your customers, and really knowing these target audiences and the suppliers really well to work with them in the long term. And I'd almost like to flip this around because that's almost the external relationships, if you like, but then you have the internal relationships, and I think obviously without great people and great managers, then the companies struggle to make a mark in any industry. So the values that you work with externally, do you see a lot of similarities to the way you manage internally? Because you've obviously had a lot of experience in managing and leading multifunctional teams. So what has been your experience that side, and how have you really been able to help these teams achieve their targets?
Absolutely. I've always tried to apply the same principles in terms of communication, in terms of understanding, in terms of developing relationships where we look for our mutual benefit, right? So when it comes to our internal teams, in many cases it's the same, right? In large global companies like the ones I have worked, you need a lot of help from your internal teams, whether it is the global brand team, it's global supply chain, in some cases finance, and or R&D, you name it, right? So it's also about understanding, okay, what's success look like for you, and then how can I help to that success? What are the things that I will need from you? So we're being very transparent with that. When it comes to my own teams, it's the same. So whether it is at the team level or even the individual level, it's always trying to understand, okay, what is success for us as a team and for you as an individual? How that success can be created? How can we work together to drive it? For me, it's all about that, right? It's to drive that relationship, not because we want to be best friends, but because we are professionals that we want to make progress together, right? So I need to understand what is your goal and how I can help your goal. And the same way, I need to be transparent of that. This is the way you can help my goal. So let's work together and get the best for both of us in the long term, right? So sometimes this is always is not always about every situation, but it's in some cases you need to compromise. In some cases the other person will compromise, but because you have created the trust, people are willing to do it, or you are willing to do it, because you know that eventually they will come and help you when you need it, right?
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, you mentioned that there's three things you mentioned there that I think are really interesting, that I think managers have struggled with in the COVID period. So, building trust, having the transparency, and being able to help people, those are three key elements of what I think makes a great manager. It makes great teams and helps people achieve their successes, which you've also mentioned, but clearly when we've not been able to see people face to face, it has been tough, so, I mean, is there a way you've found to deal with that you found successful over the last, say, 18 months or so?
I wouldn't call it success in the sense that it's always suboptimal, right? Not being able to be face-to-face and meet people is one of the things that affected me the most in the way I like to manage, right? I like to visit the markets, I like to travel, I like to be face-to-face with people, and have not been able to do that in the last 18 months. But you can still, let's say, supplement that or let's say offset that by being present. Right. So one thing I have tried to do all along this time is to ensure that I would frequently talk to the people in my team, even people that are not directly reporting to me. They may have been indirects or in other parts of the business. I would ensure that frequency of interaction would not suffer, right? In a way, I try to recreate what would happen if you are walking in the office and you run into someone and you ask them, how are you? How's your family? How are things? What's happening with this and all that? So I have tried to specifically and deliberately create those situations, right? Just by setting, look, I have not talked to you in 3 weeks, so let's set 30 minutes, let's catch up. Maybe I didn't have a specific objective for that catch up, but I would still create the space. With my team, I made it by setting regular interactions, either every week or every other week. And even though I may not have had a specific topic to discuss that day, I would still make the time and I would still have that connect. And then, yes, we would not use the entire 30 minutes, but at least I would know what's happening with that person, what's working, what's not working. So that maintains the level of trust. I think it's hard to create trust and a good relationship just with the virtual tools. But once you have created that because you have been collaborating with a person, at least you can maintain it through these kind of things. So it's a frequency of communication and making the time and be deliberate about trying to be there for your people.
No, again, a really interesting answer. And I think you mentioned at the start of that being present. And it's such a let's say an easy thing to say, but a difficult thing to do. I think there's so many distractions on people's attention these days with technology, pulling people away from actually where they are at that particular time. But I guess the reality is the only moment you ever really have is the one that you're in right now. And I think I've been in meetings where people have been on their mobiles checking emails, and that they're not really, they're listening and taking in what's going on around them. But it's a very challenging thing, especially when it's in the current situation with so many people working remotely. It's the easy option is to send an email or to send a WhatsApp, and you might get the answer to the question, but you're not really building any kind of relationship with the individual. I mean, do you have any hints as to how you continue to do that? Because I guess you must have that same challenge yourself as well. There's only so many hours in the day, and you think, well, it'd be much easier to send an email to solve this problem, but actually I'm going to put half an hour call in the diary instead. But how do you then sort of manage the hours in the day? Because clearly, I think if you're doing that a lot, then before you know it, your days become very long. I mean, is there any advice or any hints you'll give as to how to sort of prioritize your day and how you would go about doing that?
So what's worked for me is first is about making it a priority, right? So the moment you say to yourself, this is super important for me, you do it, right? Like it's the same with exercise, the same with your kids or a doctor visit, right? You may say to yourself, yes, this is important, but, and then you let it slip. In my case, it's no, this is important, and there is no but. It has to happen, right? Then what I do is I just put it in my calendar and I just roll it and create in a way a ritual. So I know that every Tuesday, 9:30 a.m., I talk to this person. That person knows she'll talk to me. So in a way, it's kind of a routine, right? We know that if something is happening, and that helps because if it's, then in a way, it even simplifies the rest of your day, because if it's not urgent, that person knows that she'll have your time, and then they don't need to bombard you with 10 emails to ask you things, because they know that no matter what, 9:30 on Tuesday morning, there's 30 minutes there to ask you whatever you need, to check something, to review something. So then there is no need for an email at 5 p.m. on a Monday, for instance. So for me, it's those two things. It's like to tell yourself that this is important, this is a priority, this needs to happen. And if, yes, of course, we're all humans, so sometimes you have to move it, sometimes I have to cancel. But for me, it's right at the top in terms of priorities to allocate my time, is to connect with my team and some other important people in the company, even with some customers and external partners, right? So I have a small list of people that I say, no matter what, I need to talk to this person every month or every 15 days and so on. And the second point is that one of creating a routine, because that simplifies a lot. You don't need to start to be constantly looking for some time in your calendar. It's there for the next year or so, and then everything else accommodates around that.
It's interesting because I mean I think you obviously got that structure in your day. You're very strong in the prioritization. You're building the teams and relationships. And I know through the conversation a few times you've mentioned your children, and I think one of the challenges a lot of people had, especially during the COVID period, is trying to fit in their family time with work time or work time with family time. So how did you? Is there a way you managed to get some success with that? Because I think that's one of the areas most people struggled with a lot, especially in the early days.
Indeed, it's a challenge. In my case, I have had, I don't know if to call it the luck or the disadvantage, that my wife and I have different time schedules, right? She works mostly at night. I work mostly during the day. So that allows us to complement each other, right? So I support, for instance, I am the one that put the kids to bed, and I am the one that wakes up early and starts the morning routine, right? And then she takes care during the most of the day. But like everything else, I think it's important to create the routine and like the ritual of, okay, I know every morning I do this. This is part of my day. And it's probably one of the good things about not being able to travel is that then you can reinvest all that time in the family, right? In normal times, I would have been traveling every other week, and that's time away from the family, away from my kids. Now I can stay here, so I can wake up at 6:30, be with them for breakfast, walk with them to the school bus. Yes, it creates a little bit of a challenge, right? Or when they were at home and doing home school learning, I think that was probably the most challenging because I had to structure my own schedule around the time they had to connect, right? And in some cases, they were dealing with some kind of homework or something like that, and you were in the middle of a call and they would yell because they would need help. So it's challenging, but I think you can always find some ways of structuring the time, creating routines, and plan ahead. Having said that, yes, it was far from perfect, especially during the time of home learning. That was really stressful. So I really feel it for everybody that struggled with that because, I was just one of them.
Yeah, no, I know it's, again, really interesting because I think, you still see this this model that you have that I guess that works very, very well for you in the business side of things coming into the family side as well. You've got an element of structure there. People, your children know when to expect you to be around for them, just as your teams and people at work know when you're going to have things in their diary. It helps you, it helps them, and it adds the routine and a certain element or as much control of kids as you can have. So I think it's really interesting to see how the two approaches, there's a lot of similarities between them. I was sort of wondering, because you normally find that people have some, I guess, inspiration that lead them to this way of working. And I didn't know if there were people who've inspired you through your career or who've been mentors to you that maybe, let's say, if you had the chance to host your own podcast, you might invite them onto your own podcast to have a conversation with them about their own backgrounds. So I just wondered if there were really people who've inspired you to lead to this approach and who you might have as a guest on your own podcast, if that was the case.
That's a good question. So I think a lot of people have inspired me along my professional life because for me, one of the beliefs that I have is that anyone can learn, right? If we find the right teacher. And I have always looked for ways of learning from other people, right? And I also have the belief that there is always something to learn from any person you meet. They may be great or even hateful, but you can still learn something from them. So I would say probably my first two managers in the company, I would not name them without but my first two managers in my career, I think that these were people that I learned a lot. They were very different in their style. So one was like very organized and structured, and I probably learned a lot about that from him. The other person was great in terms of managing people, communicating managing relationships, establishing and building on them. So those were two role models that very early on in my career I was able to learn, and I was lucky to continue having a relationship with them over time, right? Even to this day. Then, of course, you have a lot of leaders in the industry that you can learn from, but I would say is the people closest to you that you can learn the most about this.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned learning a lot in there, and the last question I was going to have for you was around your own development. And we talked a lot about the developing of your team and the people around you, and how you've helped at the home as well on this side. But from a personal point of view, I mean, clearly, you've had a great career to date. I know from speaking to you in the past, you're someone who has very strong goals and a really strong approach to what you want to do in life. But what's next for you in terms of your own learning? Is there a particular area that you want to specifically develop yourself in over the next 12 months, let's say?
I have a couple of areas that I like to learn more. One of them is about digital, because we're all hearing right constantly that digital and e-commerce is the way of the future, but it's a field that evolves so quickly that things that you learned 4 or 5 years ago are no longer relevant, right? Or have been superseded by something else. So I think that's something that over the next 12 months, I would really like to learn a lot. And then separately let's say in conjunction to this, I also would like to learn a lot more about new retail models, right? Which is not only e-commerce, but I think for me is this concept that with the emergence of e-commerce, the traditional retail models are becoming irrelevant, right? Because nobody wants a place just to go and get a product and go back home. You want to have an experience, some kind of relationship with the product. So that's an area where I would like to learn a lot more in terms of how can we push boundaries for new retail experiences, right? Like if I look at beauty care, like how can we create new ways of exploring and finding the right fragrance for you, the right skincare product? How can you play more with makeup, with the style, so that you can get the advice of what you can and all of that in a retail environment? So I think those are the two things. So it's digital, and then the evolution of retail, and how to apply these two things in our daily work.
No, again, really interesting, because I think that the two things you mentioned there, the digital side of things and e-commerce, they're clearly going to be, well, they currently are, but I think they're going to continue to be big areas of growth and challenge in every industry, but especially the beauty and cosmetic one that you're involved in. I think you've also got the elements of business intelligence and data analytics now, where you can know so much about the customer and the consumer, and there's so much information there to make the informed decisions on this side of things. And we see this impacting on every business, every discipline, and obviously even in our personal lives quite significantly as well. I mean, I know you mentioned you like exercise. I got a Peloton bike about 5 months ago, and obviously the data that you get when you're on the bike in terms of the level of activity you're doing, it helps to push you to another level. And I think it's that type of thing. You take that example and you put it into business, and you can take the business to another level and your product to another level. But there's a lot of learning and development in this area to be done, I think, before we really see the true power of all these analytics that are out there.
Exactly. I think big data or the access to data is something that will transform all businesses over the coming years, right? I think we're just barely scratching the surface on that, in the sense of how immediate this feedback can be, and what the consumer, or all of us as consumer, we can do with that product, right? That could be about a product performance. It could be about your own personal characteristics. So there are so many aspects that will be touched by the availability of data, by the availability of digital tools that interact with us, as well as new sources of information, right? Like DNA analysis and other tools that we cannot even think of, but will change a lot the products we choose and how we consume them.
Mm-hmm. No, it's definitely going to be a big learning curve, as you mentioned, but an interesting challenge for yourself and for the industry for the coming years. So it's good to see that you're already ahead of the game on that side as well, and planning to learn and develop in that area. So, I mean, I think really all that's left for me to say, Jose, is really thank you. A huge thanks for spending the time with us today. I think it's been really insightful in terms of how you go about your own day, how you really have achieved what you've achieved in your career, and to get your insights on the industry that you've had a huge level of experience in across the globe is always interesting for the network to hear. So it's been really enjoyable speaking to you, and I think our network will also take a lot from it. So I think obviously what we tend to find is a lot of people tend to want to reach out to the guests after they've heard the podcast. So if any of the network wants to reach out to you, what's the best way they can do that, Jose?
I would say the best way is through LinkedIn. I mean, they can find me there, and they can reach out to me. And I generally accept all invitations, because I think the more the merrier on that. I mean, you never know when you'll find someone in your network, and you can work together or help each other. For me, it's been a pleasure to be here as well. I think that in the same way that we were talking earlier about how I learn from other people in my career, if I can, even if in a very small way, but I can help other people with my experience, with what I have learned, it's really a pleasure, right? I think it's our duty as well to try to help other people that maybe are just starting their professional development or are in an earlier stage of that. So it's been really great to be here with you.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So thank you again for your time, Jose. And as I say, I know the network will really benefit from this. So they'll appreciate the help and advice you've given, and I'm sure a lot of them will reach out to you for a more detailed individual chat as well. So once again, thank you so much for your time, and have a good rest of the day. And hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll be able to meet in person again.
I hope so. Thank you very much, Paul. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast episode. If you'd like to reach out to Paul or myself, please feel free to send a connection through on LinkedIn. And if you'd like to listen to previous episodes of the podcast, you can find them all at our website, www.emearecruitment.eu.